Grace Sullivan carried a dying 4-year-old through a Wyoming blizzard and a lie that could cost her everything. The widowed rancher who opened his door had no idea about the second daughter she'd hidden, no idea about the man hunting them across state lines, and no idea that 3 months later, he'd be standing in a courtroom fighting a judge to keep them both. This is how three desperate strangers became a family. Beth Sullivan had stopped shivering. That was worse than the shivering had been. Grace knew what it meant when a body stopped fighting the cold, when the muscles gave up trying to generate warmth, when a 4-year-old child went quiet and still in her mother's arms. The wagon driver was dead. Grace had checked an hour ago, crawling over the seat through wind that cut like knives, and found him frozen solid, with the reins still wrapped around his fists. The horses had wandered off somewhere in the white darkness. The wagon tilted at an angle that suggested a wheel broken or a drift too deep to cross. Grace didn't remember leaving the wagon. She remembered lifting Beth, remembered Anna's small hand gripping the back of her coat, remembered thinking that if they stayed in that wagon, they'd be corpses by morning, frozen in their seats, like the driver waiting for spring thaw to reveal what winter had taken. So she walked, through snow that came past her knees, through wind that screamed across the Wyoming prairie like something living and furious. She followed fence posts when she could find them, stumbling from one to the next, using them to keep a straight line toward what she hoped was shelter. Anna walked behind her without complaint. 7 years old and already tougher than most grown men Grace had known. The child carried their bag, the one with Anna's books and Beth's wooden horse and Grace's wedding ring from Henry, and she never once asked to stop. Beth hung limp in Grace's arms, too light. She'd always been small, but now she felt like nothing like Grace was carrying a bundle of clothes instead of a child. Grace tried to remember the last time Beth had spoken. Months ago, before they left Missouri, before Warren started coming to their bedroom door at night, the fence post ahead looked different, thicker. Grace blinked ice from her eyelashes and realized it wasn't a post. It was the corner of a building. A house. Lamplight showed gold through a window. Grace fell against the door. She had no strength left for knocking. She just pressed her body against the wood and prayed someone inside would hear. The door opened. Grace fell forward into warmth and light and the startled arms of a man who caught her before she hit the floor. "Lord Almighty!" The voice was deep and shocked. "Ben, get in here." Grace tried to speak. Her mouth wouldn't work. Everything was pain and fire as her frozen skin met heated air. She held Beth out, showing the man her daughter's blue lips, her closed eyes. "The child," Grace managed. "Please," she stopped shivering. The man took Beth from her arms without hesitation. He carried the small body to the fireplace and laid her on a blanket by the hearth. His hands moved quickly, checking her breathing, her pulse opening her coat. "She's breathing. Barely. Bend more blankets, hot water bottles. Move." A younger man appeared, gangly and red-haired, already running toward the back rooms. The first man, broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with a face carved from hard weather and harder years, turned to Grace. "How long were you out there?" "Hours. The driver died. The wagon broke. We walked." His eyes found Anna standing in the doorway, snow-covered and shaking, still holding that damn bag like it contained something precious. "You walked through that storm with 2 children. I didn't have another choice." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Anna. "Come here, girl. Get by this fire before you freeze too." Anna didn't move. She watched him the way a wild animal watches a trap. Grace recognized that look. It was the same way Anna had watched Warren those last weeks in Missouri. "It's all right," Grace said, though she wasn't sure it was. She didn't know this man. Didn't know where they were beyond somewhere in Wyoming territory, somewhere near the ranch belonging to the man whose advertisement she'd answered 3 months ago. "Anna, come inside." Anna stepped over the threshold. She kept her back to the wall and her eyes on the man as she edged toward the fire. The younger man, Ben, came back with blankets and earthenware bottles wrapped in cloth. The dark-haired man positioned them around Beth, covering her with layers, creating a nest of warmth. He rubbed her hands between his, trying to force circulation back into those small fingers. "She gonna make it?" Ben asked quietly. "I don't know. She's hypothermic. Might lose the fingers or toes. Might lose more than that." The man looked up at Grace. "I'm Caleb Stone. This is my ranch. You're the woman who answered my advertisement." Grace's heart lurched. "You're Caleb Stone." I am. I'm Grace Sullivan. This is Anna. That's Beth. The words came out mechanical, facts delivered while her mind tried to process everything. She'd made it. Against every odd stacked against her, through a blizzard that should have killed them, she'd found him. Your letter said you had a house, that you needed help with cooking and cleaning. You said you'd pay passage for one woman from Kansas City. I did. You didn't say anything about children. Caleb Stone's expression went very still. No, I didn't. Because you don't want children here. I didn't advertise for children. Grace felt the ground drop away. She'd gambled everything on this, sold what little she'd owned, used the money Warren had thrown at her to leave Missouri, bought passage on a train, then a wagon, then this disaster that had nearly killed them. And she'd lied in her letter, carefully, deliberately lied by omission. Told Caleb Stone she was a widow looking for work and said nothing about Anna and Beth, because no man wanted a woman with 2 children. She'd learned that in Kansas City when she'd answered 6 other advertisements and been rejected by everyone. By the time she'd found Caleb Stone's notice tacked to a board in a boarding house, she'd already decided to lie, to show up and hope that seeing them, meeting them, would make him unable to turn them away. She hadn't counted on showing up half frozen with a dying child. I can work, Grace said. Her voice was steady even though her body shook. I can cook and clean and sew and manage a household. I can do anything you need done, Caleb Stone, and I'll work harder than any woman you could have found because I have more to lose. But Anna and Beth are not negotiable. You take me, you take them. Or you turn all 3 of us back out in that storm and we die in your yard. Caleb Stone looked at her, then at Anna pressed against the wall, then at Beth small and still by the fire. A muscle worked in his jaw. Ben, he said finally, get the back bedroom ready. Clean sheets. Warm it up. Boss, we ain't got beds in there, just Alice's old furniture. Then move the furniture, make pallets on the floor. These people need somewhere to sleep that isn't the barn. Caleb stood and faced Grace. You lied to me, deliberately, in your letter. I did. Why should I believe anything else you've told me? Because I'm telling you now, I lied to get here. I won't lie about anything else. Those are my daughters. Their father died in a mine collapse 2 years ago. His brother took the house, made our lives hell until we couldn't stand it anymore. I saw your advertisement. I needed a way out, so I lied. And now you're here, in my house, with 2 half-frozen children. What am I supposed to do with you? Grace lifted her chin. Whatever your conscience allows, but I'm not leaving, not tonight. Not until that child by your fire is warm and breathing steady and strong enough to survive another trip through that cold. After that, you can do whatever you want. Turn us out, send us to town, keep us. That's your choice. But tonight we stay. Caleb Stone stared at her with eyes that were gray like winter sky. He had a hard face, weathered and closed, the face of a man who'd stopped expecting good things to happen. But his hands had been gentle with Beth, and he'd opened his door without hesitation when Grace fell against it. Ben, get that room ready. Grace Sullivan, you get yourself and that older girl by this fire. You're both soaked through and shaking. Once you're warm enough to walk straight, you can help me with the little one. Grace's breath came out in a rush she hadn't known she was holding. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We'll see if she makes it through the night first. Beth made it through the night, barely. Grace sat by the fire until dawn, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a prayer answered. Caleb Stone sat across from her in a chair by the window, silent and watchful. He didn't sleep. Neither did Grace. Ben had prepared the back bedroom like Caleb ordered. Anna had gone there after warming up, taking her bag with her, and Grace could hear her moving around in there, probably still awake, probably watching the door. When the first light touched the windows and Beth's color had gone from blue-gray to pink, when her breathing had steadied and her fingers showed no signs of blackening, Caleb stood and stretched. She'll live, might have some frostbite on the toes. We'll know better when the feeling comes back. He looked at Grace. You should sleep. I need to check on Anna first. The girl hasn't made a sound in 3 hours. She's either asleep or sitting in the dark planning an escape route. Either way, she's safe. Grace wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her like hands. She nodded and stood, and her legs nearly gave out. Caleb caught her elbow, steadied her. Easy. You walk through a blizzard. Your body's trying to catch up with what you put it through. I've done harder things. I don't doubt it. He guided her toward the back bedroom. Get some sleep. I'll watch the little one. Beth. Her name is Beth. I'll watch Beth. Grace stopped at the bedroom door. Why are you helping us? You don't want children here. You said as much. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. I didn't want a lot of things. Most of them happened anyway. Go to sleep, Grace Sullivan. He walked back to the fire and Beth. Grace watched him settle into his chair, his eyes on her daughter, with a focus that was almost fierce. Then she went into the bedroom where Anna was indeed still awake, sitting on a pallet with her knees drawn up, watching the door. Is Beth alive? Anna whispered. She's alive. Is the man going to keep us? I don't know, baby. We'll find out tomorrow. Grace lay down beside her daughter and pulled her close. Anna was rigid for a moment, then melted against her mother's side. They fell asleep like that, holding each other, while outside the window the blizzard began to dawn and Wyoming slowly turned from white fury to white silence. Grace woke to the smell of coffee and something burning. She sat up disoriented and realized pale light filled the room. Afternoon, not morning. She'd slept for hours. Anna's pallet was empty. Grace's heart lurched. She ran to the main room and found Anna and Beth both sitting at a rough wooden table near the kitchen. Anna had a cup of milk in front of her. Beth sat wrapped in blankets, pale but awake, her eyes tracking Grace's movement. Caleb Stone stood at the stove, glaring at a pan of what looked like scrambled eggs that had achieved a texture somewhere between rubber and leather. You let them sleep, Grace said. Seemed like you needed it. He scraped the eggs onto plates without looking at her. I made breakfast. It's not good, but it's hot. Grace crossed to her daughters. Beth reached for her and Grace scooped her up, checking her over. Pink cheeks, warm skin, no blackened toes visible through the thick socks someone had put on her feet. She woke up an hour ago, Caleb said. Hasn't said a word. The older one said that's normal. Beth doesn't talk, Anna said matter-of-factly. She hasn't talked in 7 months. Not since Uncle Warren came to our room. Caleb's hand stilled on the spatula. Your uncle did something to her. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. He just stood in the doorway at night and said things. Terrible things about Mama, about us, about what would happen if we didn't leave. Beth stopped talking after the third time. She hasn't said a word since. Grace closed her eyes. Anna, you don't have to tell him that. Why not? He needs to know who we are, that we're not normal, that we come with problems. Anna looked at Caleb with those old assessing eyes. You should know what you're getting if you decide to keep us. Caleb set the pan down. He turned to face them, this lean, hard man with gray eyes and scarred hands. Eat, then we'll talk about what happens next. They ate the terrible eggs. Beth managed 3 bites before she couldn't anymore. Anna finished hers without complaint and thanked Caleb, which seemed to surprise him. Grace ate and watched this man move around his kitchen with the economical movements of someone who'd lived alone for a long time. The house was clean but sparse. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors, everything functional and nothing decorative. The work of a man who had stopped seeing his home as anything but a place to sleep between days of labor. After breakfast, Caleb washed the dishes while Grace settled Beth on the sofa near the fire. Anna stood by the window looking out at endless white. It's still snowing, Anna observed. It'll snow for another day at least, Caleb said. Maybe 2. Roads won't be passable for a week. So we're stuck here, Grace said. We're all stuck here. Caleb dried his hands on a towel and faced her. Here's what I know. You lied to get here. You've got 2 children you didn't mention. One of them is traumatized into silence. You're running from a man who scared you badly enough to flee across half the country in winter. And now you're in my house, with nowhere else to go and a storm that'll kill you if you try to leave. That's accurate. Here's what I'm offering. You can stay through winter. Work like you said you would. Cook clean, manage things. In return, you get a room and food and safety for you and the girls. When the spring thaw comes and the roads open, we'll discuss what happens next. If it's working, you stay. If it's not, I'll pay your passage to wherever you want to go. Grace heard the careful distance in his words. Through winter. Not permanently, not a promise, a trial period. It was more than she'd expected and less than she'd hoped for. I accept your terms. Good. Now I've got rules and you'll follow them. This is my house. What I say goes. You don't like how I run things, you can voice it once, but the final decision is mine. The girls stay out of the barn unless Ben or I are there. Too many ways for a child to get hurt. They don't go outside alone. Not in this weather, not ever. Wyoming isn't Missouri. We've got wolves and mountain lions and cold that'll kill you in an hour if you're not prepared. Grace nodded. Anything else? Yeah, we're clear on what this is. I need help with my house. You need a safe place to keep your children. That's all this is. I'm not looking for a wife. I'm not looking for a family. I'm offering work and shelter. Nothing more. The words stung more than Grace wanted to admit, but she understood. She could see it in the careful way he avoided looking at Beth, in the distance he kept from Anna, in the absolute absence of anything personal in this house. Caleb Stone had lost something. Someone, and he had no intention of replacing them. I understand, Grace said. I'm not here for romance, Mr. Stone. I'm here to survive. Then we understand each other. We do. Good. Ben's in the barn. I'll introduce you later. For now, get yourself settled. Make yourself useful. The kitchen needs organizing and my socks need darning, and I haven't had a decent meal since my wife died 14 months ago. He put his hat on and walked out into the snow. Grace watched him go, this hard, damaged man who'd opened his door to strangers and promised them winter. It wasn't love. It wasn't even kindness, really. Just a transaction. Work for shelter, labor for safety. But Grace Sullivan had learned that safety was the rarest commodity of all, and she'd take it however it came. Anna appeared at her elbow. Is he always this grumpy? I think he's been alone too long to remember how to be anything else. Are we staying? Through winter. After that, we'll see. Anna nodded, then in a voice so soft Grace almost missed it. He didn't flinch when he picked up Beth. Most people flinch or make a face when they see her being so quiet. He just picked her up like it was normal. Grace looked at her daughter, 7 years old and already reading people the way Grace read recipes, cataloging reactions, building assessments, deciding who was safe. Did that make you trust him? Grace asked. Not yet, but it's a start. The days folded into each other. Grace kept her word. She cooked every meal. She scrubbed every surface. She reorganized the pantry and darned the socks and mended torn shirts until her fingers ached. She learned the stove's moods, which burner ran hot and which barely held a flame. She made bread from memory and stew from whatever she could find and somehow turned Caleb Stone's house into something that felt less like a tomb. Caleb kept his distance. He spoke at meals, but only about practical things. Fence posts, feed supply, how many cattle Ben had counted. He worked from dawn until dark, coming in only to eat and sleep. He spoke to Anna only when she spoke first, which was rare. He didn't speak to Beth at all, and Beth didn't look at him. But Grace watched, and she saw things Caleb didn't think anyone noticed. The extra firewood stacked by the door every morning before she woke. The wooden horse that had appeared on the kitchen table one evening, carved with surprising delicacy, left there without a word. Beth found it the next morning and carried it to her corner by the fire and held it while she drew on scraps of brown paper Grace gave her. She watched Caleb teach Ben to make porridge on a morning. Grace overslept because Beth had coughed all night. Breakfast was waiting when she stumbled out, guilty and exhausted. He never mentioned these things. Grace never thanked him. But she cataloged each act the way Anna cataloged his movements, building a portrait of a man who couldn't say what he felt but couldn't stop showing it. On the 15th morning, Anna cornered Caleb in the barn. Grace didn't know it had happened until Ben told her later, with a look on his face like he'd witnessed something sacred. Anna had apparently stood in the barn doorway and told Caleb his horses were too skinny. He'd said they were winter horses. She'd said her mama had opinions about feeding animals properly. He'd said her mama had opinions about everything. Then Anna had walked in uninvited and said something that made Ben leave to give them privacy. When he came back 20 minutes later, Anna was sitting one chair closer to Caleb at dinner. Nobody mentioned it. Everybody noticed. The third week brought a break in the weather and a visitor. Grace heard the horse before she saw it, the crunch of hooves on packed snow. She went to the window and watched an old woman ride up on a gray mare bundled in so many layers she looked like a moving quilt. Caleb came from the barn. "Eleanor, what the hell are you doing out in this?" Checking on you, you stubborn fool. The woman dismounted with surprising ease. Heard you've got a woman and children. Figured I better come see before the whole territory makes it a scandal. Eleanor Walsh pushed into the house without knocking. She was perhaps 70, with white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She spotted Grace standing in the kitchen with Beth hiding behind her legs. Lord have mercy, you're the mail-order bride. I am. And these are the children he didn't know about. Eleanor pulled off her gloves. Word travels fast out here, honey. It's the only thing that does. She crossed to the fire. I'm Eleanor Walsh. I live 6 miles west. Been Caleb's neighbor since before his wife died. I was a mail-order bride myself 42 years ago, so don't think I'm here to judge. Grace felt something unlock in her chest. Would you like coffee? I'd like whiskey, but coffee will do. Anna appeared from the back room, book in hand, and assessed the stranger. Who are you? I'm the old woman who knows everyone's business. Who are you? Anna Sullivan. I'm 7. I can read. Good. Most grown men here can't. Eleanor sat by the fire and looked at Grace. Listen carefully. I didn't ride 6 miles in this cold just to meet you. I came to warn you. People in town are already talking. Unmarried woman living with a widower. Children nobody knew about. The gossip is building and it'll get ugly if you don't get ahead of it. I've dealt with gossip. Not like this. Out here, reputation is survival. If the respectable women decide you're improper, they'll shut you out. No help at calving time. No doctor when someone's sick. No credit at the mercantile. Eleanor leaned forward. And if anyone finds out you lied to get here, they'll use it against you. Against Caleb, too. What are you suggesting? Marry him. Make it legal before spring thaw. A marriage certificate makes everything proper. Gives you legal standing. Makes those girls his responsibility in the eyes of the law. Eleanor paused. And makes it a lot harder for anyone to take them from you. The words hit Grace like cold water. Legal standing. She hadn't thought about Warren in legal terms. She'd been focused on surviving each day on earning her keep that she hadn't considered the larger picture. An unmarried woman with no legal protections. 2 children with no legal father. And Warren somewhere behind them with blood claim to Anna and Beth. Does Caleb know about the man you're running from? Eleanor asked quietly. Enough. Does he know the man could come for the children? He asked about legal claim. I was honest. Then he's thinking about it. Caleb's proud and scared, but he's not stupid. He knows what a marriage would do. He's just too stubborn to bring it up. Eleanor smiled. I asked my second husband. He said yes before I finished the sentence. Out here, we do what needs doing. Modesty is a luxury. The door opened and Caleb came in, shaking snow from his hat. He saw Eleanor and his expression went carefully blank. You two been talking? We have, Eleanor said pleasantly, about the weather. Like hell. Caleb hung his coat. Eleanor, whatever you're stirring up, don't. I'm not stirring anything. I'm preventing a wildfire. She stood and gathered her gloves. I've said my piece. Grace, that coffee was excellent. Caleb, you're an idiot, but a decent one. She looked at Anna. Keep reading, girl. Knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you. She left like a storm passing through. The house felt bigger without her. Caleb stood by the door. Grace dried her hands and waited. She told you to marry me, Caleb said. She told me to protect my daughters. Same thing. Grace turned to face him. Is she wrong? Caleb pulled out a chair and sat. He looked at Grace across the table. This woman who'd been in his house 3 weeks and had already changed it. Not just clean, changed. Made it feel like someone lived here instead of dying here slowly. If Warren comes looking, Caleb said, if he finds you unmarried living in a man's house with no legal standing, he takes those girls. Any judge would side with blood family over an unmarried mother in a compromised situation. I know. But if you're married, if those girls have a stepfather with a ranch and standing in the community, he's got no ground. I know that too. Then you know what I'm about to say. Grace sat across from him. Say it anyway. His jaw worked. I'm not asking because I want a wife. I'm not asking because of feelings or romance. I'm asking because those 2 girls deserve to be safe. Legally, permanently safe. The only way I can guarantee that is to make them mine in the eyes of the law. You're proposing. I'm offering protection, a name, legal standing for you and the girls. In return, you keep doing what you're doing, running this house, caring for things, being what you've been. Grace's eyes burned. What about Alice? Caleb flinched. What about her? You loved her. You still love her. Anna hears you talking to her through the walls at night. How does a dead woman feel about you marrying a stranger? His voice cracked once, then held. Alice would tell me to stop being a fool and do what's right. She was practical. She'd look at those girls and say, Caleb Stone, you protect them. That's what men do. He paused, and that's all this would be. Protection. That's all I can promise. Grace looked at him, this broken, stubborn man who carved toys for frightened children and left firewood by doors and talked to his dead wife because he didn't know how to talk to the living. I have conditions, Grace said. Name them. The girls call you whatever they choose. You don't push, Beth especially. She comes to you in her own time or not at all. Agreed. I keep my own space until I decide otherwise. A marriage on paper doesn't mean a marriage in that bedroom. Not until we're both ready. Agreed. And you stop apologizing to Alice's ghost for living your life. She's gone, Caleb. She'd want you here. All the way here. Not half in a grave with her. Caleb was quiet so long Grace thought he might walk out. Instead, he reached across the table. His hand lay there, palm up, calloused and scarred and steady. Grace looked at that hand, a hand that had built a house and a cradle and buried a wife and child, a hand that had pulled a frozen stranger's daughter to warmth without hesitation. She put her hand in his. When the road's clear, Caleb said, there's a circuit preacher. We do it simple, just us and the girls and Eleanor as witness. That's enough. I can't promise to love you, not yet, maybe not ever. I'm not asking for love. I'm asking for honesty and safety and a chance to build something that matters. Can you give me that? I can try. Then I'll try too. They sat their hands joined across the kitchen table. Two people making promises not about romance, but about survival. About choosing each other from desperate, clear-eyed courage that comes when you've lost everything and find one more thing worth fighting for. From the back room, Anna's voice carried through the wall, reading to her sister. On Beth's lap, a piece of brown paper showed a house with a chimney and three figures together. The fourth figure no longer standing apart, but moved closer now, almost touching. 2 days later, the mail rider arrived. Grace was hanging laundry when Caleb walked up, holding an envelope. The sky was gray, wind cut through her dress like knives. It's addressed to you, Caleb said. Return address is a law office in St. Louis. The ground dropped out from under her. Grace grabbed the clothesline to keep standing. Open it, she said. We don't have secrets anymore. Caleb tore the envelope and read, standing in the yard. Grace watched his face change, the careful blankness settling in, the jaw tightening. Warren filed a petition, Caleb said, for custody of Anna and Beth, abandonment, says you fled Missouri with his brother's children without consent, says you're living in an irregular domestic situation unfit for child rearing. He looked up. He's hired a lawyer, a real one. They're requesting the territorial court compel you to return the children for a hearing. No, the word came out like a gunshot. He doesn't get to take them. He terrorized us, scared my daughter into silence, and now he wants custody. The law doesn't always care about what's right. It cares about what's documented. Caleb folded the letter. But he filed this before we were married, before I adopted the girls legally. Eleanor was right. The marriage changes everything. Does it change enough? I don't know. We need a lawyer. We can't afford one. Caleb's voice went hard. Not hard at her, hard at the world. We'll afford what we need to afford. Nobody is taking those girls out of this house. Not while I'm breathing. Grace stared at him. This man who 3 months ago hadn't wanted children in his life. This man standing in his yard with a letter in his fist telling her he'd fight for daughters that weren't his blood. You mean that? I mean it like I've never meant anything. Caleb, this could get bad. Warren has money. He can hire lawyers and drag this through courts for years. Then we drag back. I've got a ranch. I've got a marriage certificate, or I will. I've got Eleanor who will testify. You're a fit mother, And I've got a 7-year-old who can tell any judge exactly what Warren Harper did. I won't put Anna through that. You might not have a choice." They stood in the yard, wind cutting between them, and Grace felt old fear climb her spine. The fear that no matter how far she ran, Warren would find them, that his money and his name and the law's preference for men would take her daughters. "Grace," Caleb stepped closer. "Look at me." She looked. "I didn't just marry you on paper. When I do, I marry those girls too. Anna with her fire and Beth with her drawings and all the broken pieces of your family. They'll be mine. You understand, mine to protect, mine to defend, mine in every way that matters." That evening, after the girls were in bed, Grace and Caleb sat at the kitchen table again. The fire burned low. "I'll ride to town tomorrow," Caleb said. "Talk to Arthur Blaine. He's the lawyer above the mercantile. Smart, fair, owes me a favor. I'll tell him the truth, that I'm marrying you to protect your children from a man who hurt them. That Warren's petition is based on lies, and I'll ask him what we need to do to make sure no judge can take them." The next day, Anna found the letter. Grace came into the girls' room and found Anna sitting on the bed with it in her hands, her face white. "Where did you get that?" Grace asked. "Papa's coat pocket." The word hit Grace like a physical blow. Papa. Anna had never called Caleb anything, and now reading a letter threatening to tear them away, she'd called him Papa. "Is Uncle Warren coming to take us?" Anna asked. Grace sat beside her. "He's trying, but we're not going to let him. He'll say terrible things about you and about Caleb, and they might believe him because he has money." Anna folded the letter with precise creases. "Then I'll tell them. I'll tell the judge what Uncle Warren did, how he came to our room, how he yelled, how Beth stopped talking. I'll tell them everything." "Sweetheart, that would mean standing up in front of strangers. I've done harder things. I walked through a blizzard. I can talk to a judge." Grace pulled her daughter close and held tight. This impossible, fierce, heartbreaking girl who'd carried her father's dying wish for 2 years and never once put it down. The door opened. Caleb stood there. He'd heard everything. "Did you just call me Papa?" he asked Anna. Anna lifted her chin. "Yes." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Anna stepped forward. "You gave us a room with a lock. You carved Beth a horse. You married Mama to keep us safe, and now you're fighting an Uncle Warren for us. My real daddy would like you. He'd say you're a good man." Caleb braced his hand against the doorframe. Grace watched him fight for composure. "I'm going to do everything I can," Caleb said. "Everything. You understand, nobody's taking you from this house. Not Warren, not any judge, not anyone." "I know." Anna walked to Caleb and put her arms around his waist. Caleb's hands hovered uncertain, then came down on her shoulders. He held her like she was made of glass and iron at the same time. A small sound came from the corner. Beth stood in the doorway, her wooden horse clutched against her chest watching, her eyes huge and dark. Beth crossed the room slowly. She stopped at Caleb's side and reached up and took his hand. Just 2 of his fingers gripped in her small fist. She didn't look at him, she looked at Anna, but she held on. Caleb looked down at the small hand gripping his fingers. His face broke open the way frozen ground breaks in spring. "Well," he said, and his voice was wrecked. "I guess that settles it." Beth whispered something so quiet Grace almost missed it. Anna heard. Anna translated, with a voice thick with tears. "She says you're not cold anymore." Caleb closed his eyes. His hand curled gently around Beth's fingers. "No, I reckon I'm not." They stood there, the 4 of them, in a hallway that smelled of wood smoke and bread. Caleb with his girls, Grace with her family, all of them holding on against whatever was coming. That night, Grace didn't go to her room. She stood in the hallway and looked at Caleb's door, then at hers, and made a choice she'd been circling for weeks. She knocked. Caleb opened it. He'd taken off his boots, but nothing else. He looked at her and waited. "I don't want to sleep alone tonight," Grace said. "Not because I'm scared, because I'm tired of doors between us." Caleb stepped back. Grace walked in. The room was spare and clean, a photograph of Alice on the dresser in a simple frame. Grace looked at it. "She's beautiful." She was. Grace turned to face him. "I'm not replacing her. I know. But I'm here, and I'm choosing to be here. Not for protection, Not for the girls, for you. Caleb reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand trembled. I'm not good at this, at saying things. Alice used to say I was like a house with all the curtains drawn. Then let me in, one curtain at a time. He kissed her, not gentle, desperate and honest tasting of grief and gratitude, in the terrifying possibility of feeling something again. Grace kissed him back. She poured into it everything she'd been holding at arm's length. The fear, the hope, the growing truth that she loved this difficult, broken, stubborn man. Stay, Caleb said against her mouth. I'm staying. Later, lying in the dark with Caleb's heartbeat under her ear and his arm around her waist, Grace listened to the wind and thought about Warren, about the letter, about the fight coming. Caleb, whatever happens, whatever the courts decide, I need you to know something. What? I didn't come to Wyoming looking for love. I came looking for survival. But you gave me both. Grace pressed her hand against his chest. I love you. Not because you're protecting my daughters, because you're the kind of man who carves a wooden horse for a child who's afraid of him and waits for her to come instead of pushing. Because you leave firewood by the door and never mention it. Because you're learning to let people in after 14 months of keeping everyone out. Caleb was quiet so long Grace thought he'd fallen asleep. Then his arm tightened. I love you too, he said, and the words sounded like they'd been dragged from somewhere deep and locked. Didn't plan to, didn't want to, fought it every day, but you walked into my house with 2 frozen children and a lie, and you made everything better. You made me better. We made each other better. Yeah, we did. His lips pressed against her hair. Grace closed her eyes. Tomorrow the fight would begin. But tonight she was loved. Tonight her daughters were safe. Tonight she was home. And Grace Sullivan had learned that home wasn't a place you found. It was a thing you built nail by nail, meal by meal, trust by trust, with someone brave enough to build it with you. The circuit preacher came through on the first clear day in March. Reverend Amos Crane, who rode a mule and carried a Bible, so worn the cover had been replaced twice. Caleb met him at Eleanor's and brought him back on a morning when snow had pulled back enough to show patches of brown earth. Grace dressed the girls in the cleanest clothes they had. Anna wore a ribbon Eleanor brought blue against her dark hair. Beth wore a dress Grace had sewn from Eleanor's donated fabric and held her wooden horse in one hand and Anna's fingers in the other. Grace wore Alice's dress. She'd found it folded in Caleb's trunk. Cream cotton, simple cut, embroidered flowers along the hem. It fit like it had been made for her. Caleb saw her and stopped breathing. She watched it happen, the color leaving his face, his hands going still. I can change, Grace said. I should have asked. Don't change. His voice was rough. She'd want it worn. She'd hate knowing it was sitting in a trunk. The ceremony lasted 4 minutes. Reverend Crane spoke the words. Caleb said, I do, looking at Grace with an expression she couldn't read. Grace said, I do, looking at Caleb with an expression she didn't try to hide. You may kiss the bride, Crane said. Caleb leaned in. Grace met him halfway. The kiss was brief and careful. A promise sealed rather than passion declared. When they separated, Anna was watching with her arms crossed, and Beth was drawing on a scrap of paper she'd smuggled into the ceremony. Well, Eleanor said, wiping her eyes. That's done. Grace Stone. Grace turned the name over in her mind. Grace Stone. It fit differently than Sullivan. Lighter somehow. They ate dinner together. Ben told a story about a cow stuck in a snowdrift. Eleanor told about her own wedding when her husband said, I don't, instead of I do, and the preacher had to start over. Anna laughed, actually laughed, and Beth looked up from her drawing and watched the laughter like something she was trying to remember. 2 weeks after the wedding, Beth fell sick. It started with a cough, small at first. By the second day, her breathing had grown labored and her forehead burned under Grace's hand. By the third day, Beth wouldn't eat and couldn't keep water down, and her skin had taken on a grayish cast. Lung fever. Grace moved Beth's bed closer to the fire. She made poultices from mustard and flour. She boiled water and held Beth over the steam. She crushed willow bark for fever and spooned broth between cracked lips. Nothing helped. On the 4th night, Beth's breathing turned shallow and irregular. Grace sat by the bed with her hand on Beth's chest, counting breaths. 1, 2, 3, too long between each, too faint. Anna sat in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, watching with ancient eyes that had seen too much death. Mama, Anna whispered, is Beth going to die? Grace wanted to lie, but she'd promised Anna truth. I don't know, baby. I'm doing everything I know. But I don't know. The door opened. Caleb stood there, hair mussed from sleep shirt untucked. Let me sit with her. You need to sleep. I can't leave her, Salam. You're not leaving. I'm here. I'll watch her every second. If anything changes, I wake you. Grace hesitated. 4 days without real sleep. 4 days watching her daughter slip away. Please, Caleb said quietly. Let me help. Grace placed Beth in Caleb's arms. The child was so light, too light, a bundle of bones and fever-hot skin. Caleb sat in the chair by the bed, Beth against his chest, his hand on her back feeling each breath. Grace stood in the doorway, unable to leave. Caleb began to talk, soft and low. Stay with us, little one. Your mama needs you. Your sister needs you. And I... His voice broke. I just found you. I ain't ready to let you go. You hear me, Beth Stone, you fight. You're a fighter like your mama. Like Anna. You fight. Grace pressed her hand to her mouth. She'd never heard him say so much. Never heard his voice crack like that. Never seen him so openly afraid. Morning came. Beth's fever broke. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at Caleb with confusion and recognition. Papa, she whispered. Caleb's tears came then, silent and unstoppable. He held Beth against his heart and wept. Grace stood in the doorway watching this man hold her daughter, willing her to live, and she knew with absolute certainty that they were his now. Not by blood, not by law, by choice, by the fierce protective bond that forms when you stand guard over someone's life through the darkest hours. Beth recovered slowly. It took another week before she could sit up without coughing. 2 weeks before she could walk across the room. But she recovered. And every day Caleb checked on her, brought her broth, sat while she drew, never pushed, just present. Then on a morning when snow was finally melting and roads turning from white to mud, Caleb came back from town with news that turned Grace's blood cold. There's a man in town asking questions, Caleb said. Young, dark hair, says he's from Missouri, asking about a woman named Sullivan who might have come through with 2 girls. Grace sat down because her legs wouldn't hold. It's not Warren himself. Too young, hired man maybe, looking to confirm you're here before Warren makes his move. How long? Days, weeks at most. Caleb had already been to see Arthur Blaine. Blaine was filing counter petitions, documenting the marriage, gathering testimony. Eleanor gave a statement so fierce the clerk asked her to lower her voice. Ben testified about the condition they'd arrived in. Reverend Crane provided a character reference. Caleb sold 10 head of cattle to pay the legal fees. The territorial judge scheduled a hearing for June. Grace couldn't eat for 3 days after the notice arrived. She'd wake at night with her heart pounding, imagining a judge taking Anna and Beth away. Caleb found her at the kitchen table at midnight. What if it's not enough, Grace said. What if Warren's money buys a decision? Then I ride to Missouri and bring them home. Caleb, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being factual. Those girls are not going back to a man who hurt them. If the law fails us, I don't fail them. You'd break the law for children that aren't yours by blood. They're mine by everything that matters. Caleb sat beside her. Grace blood didn't protect them. Blood is what hurt them. What I'm offering is better than blood. It's choice. I chose them. Every day, I choose them. Grace took his hand. Grief had made him quiet. Love was making him loud. Warren Harper arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April when the last snow was retreating up the mountainsides. Grace was teaching Anna arithmetic when she heard the horses, 2 of them moving fast. She went to the window and her blood stopped. She knew him from 200 yards away. The way he sat a horse, the set of his shoulders, that particular tilt of his hat. Anna, take your sister to the back room. Lock the door. Anna looked at her mother's face and didn't ask questions. She grabbed Beth's hand and ran. Grace wiped her hands on her apron, took it off, folded it on the table. Then she walked to the porch and stood there with her back straight and waited for the man who'd driven her across 1,000 miles to ride into her yard. Warren Harper pulled his horse up 10 feet from the porch. He was thinner than Grace remembered, harder in the face. The man beside him was older, wearing a suit, carrying a leather case. The lawyer. Grace, Warren smiled. That smile she knew, the one from the first week when he'd brought candy. You look well. Country life agrees with you. Get off my property, Warren. Your property. He swung down. Last I checked, this belongs to a man named Stone. You're just the hired help who got herself a ring. The suited man dismounted. Mrs. Stone, my name is Gerald Pruitt. I represent Mr. Harper in the matter of custody regarding Anna and Beth Sullivan. We have a court order requiring you to present the children for evaluation. I've seen your letter, my lawyer has responded. Your lawyer, Warren laughed, some frontier hack. That's what you've got protecting my brother's children. The barn door opened. Caleb came out with Ben behind him. He walked across the yard without hurrying. Grace saw what Warren couldn't, the way Caleb's right hand stayed loose at his side, the way Ben moved wide, positioning himself between the visitors and the house. They'd planned for this. Mr. Harper, Caleb stopped beside Grace, close enough their shoulders touched. You're on my land, and you're harboring my nieces. I'm their uncle, their blood, and their mother stole them in the middle of the night. Their mother brought them somewhere safe. Safe, Warren's smile flickered. From what? From you. Caleb's voice was flat. She left because you scared her 4-year-old daughter into silence. Children are fragile. Beth was always quiet. She wasn't quiet before you. Grace's voice cut between them. She sang Warren every morning while I brushed her hair. She hasn't sung in 8 months because of you. That's your version. A court will hear mine. Then let's let a court hear it. Caleb stepped forward off the porch. He was taller than Warren by 3 inches, broader by a foot. But it wasn't size that made Warren step back. It was the absolute certainty in Caleb's voice. I've adopted those girls legally. They carry my name. This ranch is their home. Their mother is my wife. You want to take them? You go through every legal channel there is. But you don't come to my home and threaten my family. Pruitt stepped forward. Mr. Stone, no one is threatening anyone. We're simply asserting Mr. Harper's rights as next of kin. His rights ended when he terrorized 3 people out of their home. Caleb turned to the lawyer. You want to serve papers? Serve them to Arthur Blaine on Main Street. He's expecting you, but this conversation is done. You are not seeing those children today. I have a court order. You have a petition filed in Missouri. We're in Wyoming territory. Your Missouri paper doesn't compel anything here until a territorial judge says it does. Caleb paused. I checked. Pruitt's expression shifted, the first crack in composure. He glanced at Warren. This isn't over, Warren said. He looked at Grace with that look she knew, the one he'd given through the bedroom door at night, possession disguised as concern. Those are Henry's girls. They belong with family. They are with family, Grace said. You were never their family. You were their nightmare. And if you come near them again, I'll tell every judge between here and Washington exactly what you did in that house. Every word you said standing over my bed. Every night you came to our door. Warren's mask slipped. Just for a second. Enough for Grace to see the rage underneath. But they were in daylight now on an open ground, and Caleb Stone stood beside her. Get on your horse, Caleb said. Ride to town. Do this the legal way or don't do it at all. But you are not welcome on my land. And if you come back without a judge and a marshal, I'll treat you like any other trespasser. Pruitt took Warren's arm. We should go. We'll file with the territorial court. Warren mounted his horse. They rode out without looking back, and Grace watched them until they were nothing but dust. Then her knees gave out and Caleb caught her. Easy, I've got you. He's going to fight. Then we don't stop either. Caleb held her on the porch. Grace, he walked onto our land, and he left without those girls. That's a win, the first of many. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Grace's life, and she'd survived a blizzard. Arthur Blaine filed counter petitions, gathered testimony, documented everything. The territorial judge scheduled a hearing for early June. Caleb and Grace would have to make the 2-day ride to Cheyenne, leave the girls with Eleanor, face Warren and his lawyer in a courtroom. Let a stranger in a black robe decide their family's fate. The night before they left, Grace couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, watching stars. Caleb found her at midnight. Come to bed. I can't stop thinking about what happens if we lose. We won't. You don't know that. No, Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. But I know I'll fight for them until there's nothing left to fight with. I know Arthur Blaine is good. I know every person in this territory who's met you knows you're a good mother. And I know that judge is going to hear Anna's statement and see what Warren really is. What if it's not enough? Then we make it enough. Grace turned in his arms. I love you, Caleb Stone. I love you too. Now come to bed. You need rest. They rode out at dawn. The girls stood on the porch with Eleanor. Beth clutched both her wooden horses. Anna stood straight, trying not to cry. Mama, Anna called as they reached the gate. Don't let the mean man win. Grace looked back. I won't, baby. I promise. Caleb turned in his saddle. Anna, I won't let him win either. That's my promise. The courthouse in Cheyenne was crowded and hot. Warren sat on one side with Pruitt and witnesses Grace didn't recognize. Grace and Caleb sat on the other with Arthur Blaine, who was calm and organized and better than Grace had dared hope. Judge Walter Crane was a gray-bearded man who listened more than he spoke. He read every document, every testimony. Anna's written statement, which was 4 pages long and detailed in a way that made the clerk's hands shake reading it aloud. Warren's case was simple: blood relative, financial means, established home. The mother had fled without legal authority, taken the children across state lines, entered into a hasty marriage with a stranger, placed the children in a remote and dangerous environment. Blaine's counter was simpler. He called Grace to testify. She told the truth, all of it. The nights, the screaming, the door without a lock. The morning Beth stopped talking. She told it in the same steady voice she used to teach Anna arithmetic. She didn't cry. She didn't look at Warren. Then Blaine called Caleb. Caleb Stone walked to the front in his best shirt with his hat in his hands and told a judge he'd never met about a woman who'd arrived in a blizzard with 2 frozen children and a lie. About Beth's blue lips and how he'd carried her to the fire. About Anna standing in his barn watching, deciding whether to trust. About wooden horses and charcoal drawings and a 4-year-old who'd whispered warm like it was the most precious word. Those girls came to my house as strangers, Caleb said. They're leaving as my daughters, not because of a piece of paper, because I watched them heal. I watched them learn to trust again after a man who was supposed to protect them broke that trust. I watched a 7-year-old carry her family on her shoulders because the adults in her life failed her. He looked at the judge, not at Warren, at the man who held his family's future. Ain't it a perfect man, Your Honor? I talked to my dead wife at night. I worked too hard. I didn't even want children when they showed up. But wanting and choosing are different things. I chose these girls. I choose them every morning when I wake up and every night when I check their room. That's not blood. It's better than blood. It's a decision made every single day. The courtroom was silent. The judge held up his hand before Pruitt could speak. Mr. Harper, the judge said, turning to Warren, I've read the depositions. I've read the child's statement. I've heard the testimony. I'm going to ask you one question, and I want an honest answer. Warren straightened. Of course, Your Honor. Did you enter the bedroom of your deceased brother's wife on multiple occasions after dark with the intention of intimidating her into vacating the family home? Pruitt leaned toward Warren, whispering urgently. Warren brushed him off. I had a right to my property. She was living there without paying rent. That wasn't my question. Warren's jaw worked. I may have spoken harshly. The situation was emotional. Did the child Beth stop speaking after these incidents began? I don't know when the child stopped speaking. I wasn't paying attention to her. The judge nodded slowly. No, I don't imagine you were. He retired to his chambers. Grace sat with her hands clasped so tight her fingers went numb. Caleb sat beside her, still as stone. 40 minutes passed. An hour. The judge returned. Petition for custody is denied. The children will remain in the legal custody of Grace and Caleb Stone. Mr. Harper, I'm further ordering that you have no contact with the minor children without the express written consent of both parents. Any violation will result in contempt charges. Grace's breath left her body. Caleb's hand found hers under the table and held on. Warren stood, but the judge wasn't finished. It is the opinion of this court, Mr. Harper, that you should return to Missouri and grieve your brother properly instead of tormenting his children." Warren walked out without looking back. Pruitt followed. The door closed, and Grace realized she was crying. Caleb pulled her against him right there in the courthouse. He held her, and she held him, and neither said a word because there weren't words big enough. "Let's go home," Caleb said finally. "Yes, let's go home." They rode 2 days back. Grace didn't sleep either night, not from worry, from the strange, weightless feeling of safety. Real safety. Legal, documented, unassailable safety. Her daughters were hers. The law said so. A judge said so. They came over the last ridge at sunset and saw the ranch below. Smoke from the chimney, Eleanor's horse tied to the porch. And on the porch, 2 small figures, standing side by side watching the road. Grace waved. Anna grabbed Beth's hand and they ran. Down the steps across the yard through the gate. Anna reached the wagon first, already climbing up before Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. "Did we win, Mama? Did we win? We won, baby. We won." Anna threw her arms around Grace, squeezing so hard Grace couldn't breathe and didn't care. Behind them, Caleb climbed down. Beth stood in the yard looking up at him. "Hey, little one," Caleb said softly. Beth reached up with both arms, the universal gesture of a child who wants to be held. Caleb picked her up and settled her against his chest. Beth put her head on his shoulder and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Papa," she said, not a whisper, a word, clear and sure, and loud enough for all of them to hear. Caleb closed his eyes. Grace watched tears run down the face of a man who hadn't cried since he buried his wife and child 14 months ago. He held Beth against his heart and let the tears come. Anna pressed against his side, and Grace put her arms around all of them. They stood in the yard while the sun went down, and Eleanor watched from the porch with a handkerchief pressed to her mouth. That evening after Eleanor left, and Ben celebrated by doing a terrible jig in the yard, after the girls were fed and bathed and tucked into bed, Grace found Caleb on the porch looking at the stars. She sat beside him and took his hand. "Beth spoke," she said. "Not a whisper, a real word, out loud. I heard it." His voice was rough and wrecked and full. "I'll hear it for the rest of my life." Grace leaned against his shoulder. 3 months ago, you didn't want children. 3 months ago, I didn't want to be alive most days." He turned to her, cupped her face in his calloused hands, and looked at her with eyes that had finally stopped grieving and started living. "Now I've got more than I deserve, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. You don't have to earn it. You just have to keep choosing it every day. Every single day." He kissed her. She kissed him back. And in the room at the end of the hall, Anna lay awake, listening to the silence of a house where no one screamed and no one pounded on doors. She pulled Beth closer and whispered to her sleeping sister, "We're home, Beth. We're really home." On the windowsill, the 2 wooden horses stood side by side. On the floor, Beth's latest drawing lay face up in the moonlight. The house with the chimney, the 4 figures all together now, no space between them. And above them, filling the whole sky in thick charcoal strokes, one word in wobbly 4-year-old letters that Anna had helped her spell: family. Spring came to Wyoming slowly, stubbornly, fighting winter for every inch. The snow retreated up the mountains. The creek ran high and cold with melt. The grass came back green and new. Grace planted a garden in the space where Alice's garden had been. She used Alice's seeds found in careful packets in the back of the pantry, each labeled in neat hand. Peas, carrots, beans, lettuce. Anna and Beth helped. Beth's hands were small but careful. She patted soil over each seed like tucking them in for sleep. Anna dug rows with fierce concentration, measuring spacing the way Grace taught her. Caleb worked on the fence nearby, close enough to watch far enough to give them space. He glanced over and smiled. An easy smile now, the kind that came without effort. "Mama," Beth said, her voice still quiet but used more freely every day. "Will these come back every year? If we tend them, if we give them what they need." Beth thought about this. "Like us. We got what we needed. Now we come back every year." Grace and Caleb exchanged a look. Anna rolled her eyes but smiled. "That's right, little one," Caleb said, walking over. "You're perennials, not going anywhere." Beth hugged his leg. Anna pretended not to be pleased but moved closer anyway. Grace watched her family, her actual legal permanent family. and she felt something settle in her chest that had been restless since Henry died. Peace, safety, home. Not the place, the people. This stubborn, fierce, gentle, broken, healing collection of souls who'd found each other in a storm and decided to stay. The sun was warm on Grace's face. The soil was soft under her hands. Her daughters were laughing. Her husband was smiling. And somewhere in Missouri, Warren Harper was learning to live with the fact that he'd lost. Grace Stone closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of earth and new things growing, and knew that this right here was what winning looked like. Not grand or dramatic, just quiet and real and permanent. A family, built from nothing, held together by choice, strengthened by weather and time, and the simple, profound act of showing up for each other every single day. Grace Sullivan had arrived in Wyoming with 2 freezing daughters and a lie. Grace Stone stood on her own porch with a husband who loved her children, who were safe in a home no one could take away. She'd built it from nothing, from desperation and courage and the stubborn refusal to let the world break her daughters the way it had tried to break her. This was not a fairy tale. There were no glass slippers, no magic that fixed what was broken. There was only a woman who kept walking through a blizzard when stopping meant dying. A man who opened his door when closing it would have been easier. 2 little girls who taught the adults around them what bravery actually looked like. Beth tugged on Grace's sleeve. "Mama, look." She pointed at the first green shoot pushing through the soil. A pea plant, tiny and brave and reaching for the sun. "That's perfect, baby," Grace said. "That's exactly right." And it was.